Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you everybody for coming here today to hear me speak. I know it's sweltering hot, and I was hoping that the shade might lure people in. But yes, I'm here today to talk about clothes, as Andy said. And looking around the audience, they say that you should visualize your audience naked, but it looks to me like you all got up this morning and put on some clothes. Maybe later tonight you'll be wearing fewer clothes than you are now. But the reality is we are all wearing clothes most of our lives. So whether you like fashion or not, whether it's something that you're passionate about, you will buy and wear a huge amount of clothing across your lifetime, whether that's your underwear or your socks or your sportswear, your sleepwear. So does anyone here check the label on their food before they buy it at the supermarket? I certainly do. I look for all the E numbers and preservatives and saturated fats and that kind of thing. But I think very few of us check the label on our clothes. Even though we are all wearing clothes most of the time, we very rarely stop to think about where they come from and who made them, where they're made, and what they're made out of. So making our clothes is actually a very complex process that happens all around the world, and it touches on millions and millions of people, whether they're farmers, fashion designers, factory workers, people who work in logistics. Actually, 80 million people worldwide are employed by the fashion industry. And it also uses a lot of natural resources, which is what we're going to chat about today. So this is one of the things that really blew my mind, I suppose, when I started working at Redress, which, as Andy said, is an environmental charity all about combating textile waste. I was learning about the natural resources that go into making our clothes. So if you do check the label on your clothes, and take, for example, today we're going to look at, a pair of jeans. I have, by the way, worn a pair of jeans just for all of your benefit. It is extremely hot in here, but we're going to look at a pair of jeans. And if you look at the label, you'll see that they're made from cotton, usually 100% cotton or some cotton and elastane. And cotton actually starts off its life, can't quite make it out, but as a tiny little puff, white puff on a plant. So I'd like you just to count in your head before we really start how many pairs of jeans you have in your wardrobe at home. So to make just one pair of jeans uses 10 meters squared of land to grow the cotton. So that's a piece of land about the size of that screen all the way up to here. That piece of land is used just to make the cotton for one pair of jeans. Now we're making 1 billion pairs of jeans every single year. That's a huge amount of land. And it's not just cotton that's using land. It's other fibers that are in our clothes, things like lyocell, tencel, viscose. They use wood pulp from trees. And globally we're logging over 120 million trees every year to make our clothes. Other things like wool, of course they come from sheep, but sheep need land to graze. So all of these fibers are using a lot of land, and I think as we go into the next part of our lifetime looking at resource scarcity and scarcity of arable land, it really does beg some interesting questions around what we prioritize and how we're using our arable land. Sorry, need the next slide. So growing the cotton to produce our jeans also uses a huge amount of water. So to grow the cotton for one pair of jeans uses 2,000 to 2,500 litres of water. And across the whole production process, including dyeing and washing, for one pair of Levi's 501, so this is a stat from Levi's, it's 2,912 litres of water. That's about the amount of fresh water that you would drink in 2 years. So that 1 billion pairs of jeans that we're making every single year would sustain the population of China with drinking water for 3 years. Think again about how many pairs of jeans you have in your own wardrobe and how long you could survive using that fresh water. We found the stats so shocking that we actually used it as the basis of a big public awareness campaign that we ran this October across the underground network in Hong Kong. It was called Get Redressed Month. And yeah, we heard anecdotally that people were really just as surprised as we were. So not only is fashion using a lot of water, it's also polluting water. This might be a little bit more well known amongst the audience here, but fashion is the second biggest polluter of clean water after agriculture. That comes from unregulated factories, which are sort of, letting out their dirty and polluted water from dyes and chemicals into local waterways. And it's no coincidence that we're producing clothes in countries like Bangladesh where there's less regulation, and countries like China who have recently started to regulate more because they realized the effect their clothing production was having on their environment, have become more expensive and less desirable. So we're constantly moving our production around the world, chasing places that aren't regulating the environmental impact of our factories. So what's polluting the water? It's chemicals. And fashion actually uses 25% of all of the chemicals in the world. That's quite extraordinary. 25% of all chemicals. That's things like pesticides. So cotton attracts a lot of bugs. And we actually use 3 kilograms of pesticides to produce 1 kilogram of cotton. So 1 kilogram of cotton, that's about 2 pairs of men's jeans, uses 3 kilograms of pesticides. And it sounds like there's some bugs in my my microphone. It's also things like dyes and water repellents, all those kinds of finishings. And lastly is energy. So when we think about our carbon footprint, we often think about flying less or maybe catching public transport, turning off the lights, that kind of thing. But there's actually a huge amount of carbon embodied in the things that we consume, including clothing. So you'll see here, fashion is responsible for around 10% of the world's greenhouse gases. Again, that's extraordinary, 10%. That's more than the shipping and aviation industries combined. Hello? And one of the big culprits there is polyester. So we've been talking about cotton, which is a natural fiber, but polyester is actually the most common fiber that we find in our clothes. And it's a man-made fiber that's made from oil. It's a type of plastic. And the process of extracting that oil and then processing it into the fiber that we know as polyester is extremely energy intensive and emits a lot of harmful gases. Slide. Polyester is also very problematic when it does eventually end up in our landfills. I mean, it's a plastic, and when we throw polyester clothes in the bin, it can take up to 200 years to decompose. So it's almost the same as throwing away a single-use plastic bottle, which we would never do. We would try to recycle. But as you're going to hear, actually, there's a lot of challenges with recycling textiles. So when we go back to that first question, what are our clothes made of? Well, they're not just made of cotton or whatever it says on the label. They're made of a lot of really valuable resources: land, trees, water, energy, human labor. All of these things go into making our clothes. And the reason that's important, sorry, you got to click that one more time. Oop, not that. The reason it's important is that the way that we make, buy, use, and eventually dispose of our clothing has changed enormously in the last 2 decades. So compared to 15 years ago, we're buying 60% more, and we're now buying 100 billion items of clothing every single year. 100 billion items of new clothing are being made every year, which when you divide that by our world's population, 7.5 billion, means that's 30 new items of clothing for every single person on this planet, from babies to centenarians. And we're also wearing it less. So we're wearing our clothes for half of the amount of time that we used to wear them for. There was a recent study in Britain across British women which found that they're wearing their clothes on average 7 times before they throw them in the bin. That seems really surprising, but actually I think when you think about what you're wearing today, how many times have you actually worn that? I think at Wonderfruit especially, how many times have you worn that kind of bejeweled bra? And when we think about our wardrobes, actually we probably wear our favorite things all of the time, and a lot of the rest of it we're wearing very seldom. I had this thought last week, I don't know why I was thinking it, that we wear our underwear and our socks far more often than we wear anything else. It must be because they're hidden. We feel like we can get the most sort of value out of them, and maybe we should be treating all of our clothes like that, and we'll chat about that in a second. So as the price of our clothing declines, and it is coming down, the value is also decreasing, or the quality, is decreasing. And we're increasingly coming to see our clothes as being something disposable, something that we can just buy and throw away as fashion trends come and go. And globally, slide, next one. We're now landfilling or burning one whole garbage truck of textiles every second. The figure is so big that it's actually really difficult to kind of imagine what that's like. In Hong Kong, the figure is 370 tons of textiles every day. I don't know, is anyone here from Hong Kong? Obviously, Andy is. There we are. So 370 tons going into Hong Kong's landfills every day. That's about 1.5 of our big Buddha every single day. Or for those who don't know the big Buddha, it's about 3 elephants every hour. It's an extraordinary amount of waste, and it's problematic not just because things in landfill leach into the soil and emit harmful gases. It's problematic because of all of those resources that we just ran through. Land, water, energy, human resources, they get wasted when we throw perfectly usable clothing into the bin. So next slide. What about recycling? Is recycling not a golden ticket? And can't we just take all of those old clothes and turn them into new clothes? Unfortunately, clothing recycling is very complicated. And even though it is happening in various parts of the world, the technology is really just not there yet. And it can't keep up with the scale of clothes that we're producing. So it's all kind of very technical, but I'm going to tell you about a few of the key limitations, because I at least find them interesting. But one of the big limitations is that fibers are often blended. So we've talked about cotton and polyester. Well, it's very common to have something that's made out of cotton polyester blend, or a polyester elastane blend. And that's almost like if you imagine trying to recycle plastics or paper. Well, what about a blend of plastics and paper? Those two fibers have to be separated first before they can be recycled individually. And the technology that's required to do that is really complicated and expensive. And then on the other end, the output that comes out of that facility is quite low value. So the process of splitting those fibers and recycling them degrades the fibers. And then what you have left is often not suitable to be used to make new clothes. So they're having to blend those recycled fibers with virgin fibers or new fibers to make our clothing, which is not ideal. Another problem is that a lot of the things that make up our clothes, again, if you compare it to something like paper or plastic, can't actually go through a recycling machine. So if you look at this pair of dungarees that I'm wearing, obviously these buckles can't go through, but surprisingly even seams can't go through. So when you're trying to recycle a pair of jeans, you actually have to cut off everything below the crotch. So you only get these two panels down the front and the back, and you have to cut the seams out the sides. So what you actually end up with is a very small percentage of what you put into the recycling facility in the first place, and the rest of it ends up as waste. Removing all of these things also requires an enormous amount of human labor, because of course when you put a whole garbage truck full of mixed textiles into a recycling facility, a machine doesn't have the capability to remove all of those things. They've all got to be done by people. That's another cost. And again, when we go back to the low value output, there aren't really incentives for brands to invest in this technology if nobody will buy what comes out the other side. So those are a couple of the key limitations. And I mean, to me, they spark some interesting questions, and something that I'd like you to think about after the talk today is, whose responsibility is this? Whose responsibility is textile waste? Is it brands? Should brands be responsible for the clothes that they produce? Should they be responsible for finding a solution for them afterwards? Maybe it is, and if brands were responsible, perhaps they would design things to make them easier to recycle at the end of their life. Or is it governments? Do we need governments to invest in this expensive infrastructure so that lots of different brands can access it? If it's not financially worthwhile for one brand to take on that enormous cost, should governments be subbing in? But even though it's very clear that there are things brands and governments need to be doing, we as consumers can also be playing our part. And we started off talking about how we're all wearing clothes. And by the very nature of wearing clothes, we are all part of this humongous and problematic industry. So what can we do? Slide, please. In the absence of recycling technology, the best thing that we can do right now is to buy less and to keep what we have in use for as long as we possibly can. So when we extend the life of clothing, basically we're getting more mileage out of all of those resources that we just spoke about. And there's a nice little stat that if we extend the active life of our clothes by 9 months, so we're actively wearing them for an extra 9 months, we would reduce the carbon, water, and waste footprints of those items by up to 20 to 30% each. So first tip of how to extend the life of your clothing is to use your clothes for as long as possible. Often people come to us at Redress and they ask, which brand should I be buying from in Hong Kong? Which are the sustainable brands? Or should I be buying organic cotton or recycled polyester? And the reality is the best decision you can make, or the best thing you can do for the environment, is to use what you already have. And the most sustainable item is the one that's already in your wardrobe. Next slide. Oh, well, I can talk about this for longer if we're going to keep it up. Caring for your clothes actually is a huge part of extending its life. And something that I wanted to mention actually is one of the themes of Wonderfruit this year is love. And I think if we really loved our clothes more, now that we know all of the resources and effort that went into making them, we would care for them more. So we often care for big ticket items like our laptops, but we would very quickly throw away a shirt because a button's fallen off. And I think we need to rewire the way that we're thinking, so we're not looking at clothes as being the value that's on the price tag, and we're thinking about the real value, the true environmental cost, and attributing the appropriate amount of care to our clothes as a result. So the second tip, there we are, is when you eventually don't want your clothes anymore, because it happens and we all make mistakes, try to extend their life by giving them, selling them, donating them, or swapping them with someone else. So again, that's all about mileage. Somebody else can use those clothes for that extra 9 months. Giving your clothes a second life is good, not only because it delays things going to landfill, but it means that that other person that you gave it to doesn't need to buy something new. So we're saving on all of those resources that would have been used to make that person's new purchase. I would encourage you to go through your wardrobe and make a box of things that you no longer wear anymore, and invite your friends over to see if they like something there, or to hold a swap party with your friends. It can be a lot of fun. But also think about all of the things that wouldn't go in that box. So, for example, your underwear, but also things like corporate event t-shirts, you know, so-and-so charity run July 2019 that you're not going to wear in July 2020 for the next one. And all of these kinds of things that we accumulate over our lives that actually we're not going to wear and nobody else will want to wear. The problem there is that charities don't want them either. So when we think about donating things for reuse, actually charities don't want your sort of Standard Chartered Marathon 2020 t-shirt. The next tip I have for you is to buy secondhand. So if you do need to buy, the best choice you can make for both your wallet and the environment is to buy secondhand. Something that Redress is really doing in Hong Kong is working to reduce taboos around secondhand shopping. A lot of people think that it's dirty or undesirable, but just leaving you with a thought, imagine the number of people who have touched your clothes along the supply chain, and also who's tried on those clothes in the store before you buy them. I think our brand new clothes are less clean than we think they are. And sharing stories is also very important here. So if we're going to try and break those taboos, then next time somebody compliments you on what you're wearing, tell them that you got it secondhand. Tell them that you were donated it by your grandpa or that you swapped it with a friend. These kinds of stories help us to rewire the perception that secondhand is bad and encourage people to value things that are old. And the very last tip I have for you is to ask questions. So another theme of Wonderfruit this year is to wonder, and I want us all to ask more questions about the things that we use, not just clothing, but actually everything, because a lot of resources go into making, for example, your phone or this microphone. So let's ask more questions about where and how things are made, and ask them of brands as well. So unless we ask these questions of brands, they're not going to know that their consumers care about it. So if you write to a brand and tell them that you'd like to know what they're doing for their sustainability policies, that sends a signal to them that it's important to you. And at Redress, we ask a lot of questions. We actually don't have the answers, so when I ask for questions in a second, don't ask me anything too complicated, because a lot of these issues are very challenging and very complex. There isn't a simple answer. So what we're doing is trying to work with brands, with industry, with governments, with consumers to ask the right questions so that we can all brainstorm solutions together, I suppose. And last slide. So I'm talking to you from Redress, just a wee plug for Redress again at the end. All of the slides that I just presented from were produced as part of Get Redressed Month, which is a big public awareness campaign we run every October, and all of our resources are on our website. You can go there to find out more about the impact of your wardrobe, what you can do as a consumer, and we also have really fantastic resources for children, school lesson plans, fun activities that they can do with your friends, so I encourage you to take a look. And Fashion Revolution Thailand is also here. They're in the, I think it's called the living area. Is that what it's called? Ah, there we are! So everybody go and visit our friends at Fashion Revolution Thailand. They have a beautiful stall where they're doing all sorts of upcycling things like weaving and screen printing, helping you to keep your clothes in use for longer. And I'm sure you can learn a lot from them as well. Thanks. Fantastic is what Andy is saying.
Fantastic, Lauren. There's some really good, really sort of mind-boggling headline facts there, but also some really sort of, sensible tips. And a lot of environmental issues, I think, are often sort of very distant from our day-to-day life. This is one that's really super close to all of us.
Very close.
Yeah, that wasn't. And for those of you who just walked in, today's theme is love. So I'm hearing a sort of strong theme of love your existing clothes. Make sure you go to more festivals so you can wear your bejeweled bras. Get like more than 7 times use out of them. And we'll dive into questions in a second. I'm just reminded that your story about sort of passing on clothes, I don't know if any of you have any sort of interest in antiques, sort of vintagey kind of stuff, but the antiques market used to just be sort of more about objects. So it was just like, this is a something or other, it's from this period, it's in good condition, therefore it's worth that much. But the whole sort of market in much more recent years has much more evolved around to the stories behind individual pieces, like where people bought it from and who owned it. And that kind of stuff. So I can sort of see a theme that might develop there with clothing, which makes it much more interesting for what's obviously sort of mass-produced pieces. So, questions. We have a nice chunk of time for questions for Lauren.
Or more lovely stories if you have.
Thank you. So I also work in the NGO world, and for a while worked on the topic of sweatshops. And so whenever I think of fashion and the impact it has on the world, I think of people who are working in sweatshops, working in these really awful conditions. And I just wondered if Redress have like a policy or like have projects that you're already doing to fight sweatshop labor.
So Redress is very much an environmental charity at its core. So we don't look into social issues, although of course social issues and environmental issues are so inextricably linked. Fashion Revolution very much does look at social issues. Fashion Revolution Thailand are here, and I'm the coordinator for Fashion Revolution in Hong Kong. And they have a guide or a standard, I suppose, that they measure brands against that you can look at on their website. But that is, again, a very complex issue. But just thinking about humans and the way that humans are involved with clothing, I had a very interesting experience last week that I'd just like to share with you. We went to a jeans factory, and this was actually a high-end jeans factory, so labor standards there were very good, but I was absolutely, not shocked, I was mind-blown to see how people actually make all of the creases and marks on our jeans with their hands, with little irons or with pieces of sandpaper. So they also showed us some very cool technology where people do that with lasers, so a big machine does it with lasers. I think we've come to think that that's the norm, but actually in most factories around the world, this is still done by hand. And what it really made me think was that clothing is a craft. It's made by skilled craftsmen, and all of our clothes are run through a machine by somebody's hand. So it's a very human-centric industry as well.
Other questions?
Who here is wearing the oldest item of clothing? The oldest item of clothing.
10 years back there?
10 is good. Denim. Nice. 13 years on a pair of shoes is good going. 8 years. Nice. So I really like that. I like that we can be proud of things that are old. And we need to recapture that. Cool. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I think we've got a bit of time. So you were saying that the sort of value of the fibres, like for what you're wearing, is just mostly the sort of panels. I mean, is anybody looking at taking, I guess, that textile waste and turning it into something utterly different?
Yes, so at the moment, of all of the clothes that we collect, around 1% is recycled into new fabrics. The majority of it is reused by charities, or it's often sold in other countries. But the rest of it, things like the seams, are downcycled. So that means that they're turned into something of less value than clothes, like insulation. So it's often used for car insulation, or stuffings, or rags. So it's not ideal from an environmental perspective, but it is better because it has some other life before it goes in the bin. And the reason it's not ideal is that it is a low value product. So we're taking something of value and making it into something of low value.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes.
Hello, I was just wondering, your company Redress, like in Hong Kong, there's a lot of businesses, especially with fashion, a lot of startup and things like that. Do you do any type of consultancy with them to kind of guide them and direct them to doing more sustainable practices? Because it's really in vogue in Hong Kong to kind of I want to start a swimsuit brand or this type of brand and that type of brand, and they want to put the label of sustainability. Can you work with them to kind of guide them towards that direction? Because as you were saying earlier, it's really difficult and expensive, and everybody's trying to make a profit. But do y'all do some type of work to help guide people to have more sustainable practices, but not necessarily be 100% sustainable? Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of...
So we don't actually work with brands to advise them on sustainability, often because brands have their own sort of in-house consultants, but we do a lot of work with young designers. That's a core part of what Redress does, is working with the designers of tomorrow. So we have online guides, very comprehensive online guides that are accessible to anyone, so brands could use them as well, all about sustainability in fibers, how to design for zero waste patterns, designing for recyclability, and we also run a competition. It's the world's biggest sustainable design competition, actually, where we sort of nurture young designers through that process and then provide a platform to showcase their talent. We work with people before they start the brand, I suppose. And interesting fact, 80% actually of a garment's sustainability is locked in at that design stage. So it's really important that we're engaging young designers.
Last question, but I know it's going to be a good one.
Switching gears a little bit, I know you said you don't work with fashion brands, but in terms of the major brands out there, I imagine that my understanding is that they are the companies that are pushing forth this fast fashion trend, which goes against the sustainability. Are there any large brands out there that have done anything meaningful to combat this trend? I just want to see if you have anything interesting to share in that.
I mean, definitely the first one that comes to mind is Patagonia. They're sort of world leaders in sustainability, and they ran an ad campaign a number of years ago which was very forward-thinking, which said, "We don't want you to buy this jacket." And their mantra really is about designing things to last a lot longer, designing things that are repairable, and then providing repair services so that we can keep our clothes in use for longer. And then when you don't want them anymore, you can give them back to Patagonia. They'll wash them, repair anything that needs to be done, and then they'll sell them on a secondhand platform. So they're really ticking all of the boxes. They're also doing some fantastic work in Patagonia itself, actually, to restore the environment there, to protect the environment there, to offset what we all know is still a problematic production line.
Fantastic. Well, look, big round of applause, for Lauren.